Hi. I was very excited when I found out I would be giving this talk on God in media because I love media, especially movies. Movies have pretty much shaped my entire life. In fact, one of my earliest memories is going to see Spider-Man 2 in theaters with my family. To this day, I hold that film in a very high regard as a cinematic masterpiece.
Pizza time.
But the movie that changed everything, all right, the movie that altered the trajectory of my life was Peter Jackson's King Kong. I saw King Kong when I was 7 years old, and even then I was just completely captivated by this larger-than-life bombastic tale of adventure in which a film crew makes a deadly expedition into an unknown land only to find themselves in a prehistoric savage land filled with creatures, monsters, and the legendary Kong. King Kong set me on a path to want to work in filmmaking. Pretty soon after, I began acting in commercials and was even cast in a couple of TV shows during my high school years. During college, I wrote and directed a few movies and worked on some award-winning films shot in the Houston area. Now, I work as a wedding and event videographer, which I absolutely love because I get to capture one of the happiest days in a person's life. I also kind of have a music career, but that's a story for a different time. So yeah, like I said, media is kind of my whole life. And media greatly impacts all of us, from the movies we watch, to the music we listen to the people that we follow on TikTok and Instagram. We live in a time where media is pretty much in our faces 24/7, which means that it goes without saying that the media that we consume has a very large impact on our outlook to the world around us. I once heard a priest describe it like this: what we think about is what we'll care about, and what we care about is what we'll chase. Now, as people, we crave beauty. Wisdom 13:5 says that beauty is written into our hearts by God, who is the ultimate beauty. And so that's why when you see a view from the top of a mountain or a beautiful nature landscape, your breath gets taken away. That's why when you see a video of a father returning home from the military to his children, it's emotionally moving. All of these things have the essence of God within them. And it doesn't have to be explicitly Christian or talking about Jesus for God's presence to be there. God is present anywhere that is good, beautiful, and true. So let's break that down, right? Good, beautiful, and true. What does that mean? Going way back, the ancient Greek philosophers talked about the three transcendentals: truth, goodness, and beauty. The mind is made to recognize truth. The heart longs for goodness, and we love beauty. Which means if we see something out in the world that is true, then it is also good and it is also beautiful. Here's the kicker: God gave us the power of free will. So as human beings, we can recognize that something is good and true and still desire something else. We can see God's beauty and still be attracted to something that is less than beautiful or a distortion of that beauty. So it doesn't just take us knowing what's beautiful and what's good, it takes a surrender of our hearts. We cannot be led by our hearts, we have to lead our hearts with our will and our intellect. The exact same concept can be applied to the media that we consume. Now, I'm not saying that you can only watch Christian media, right? Or you can only consume content that is explicitly talking about Jesus. That is not what I'm trying to say. What I'm saying is that as Catholics, we have a responsibility to make sure that the media that we consume is not actively keeping us from growing in our relationship with Christ, right? So there may be a TV show that is really popular and it's trending and all your friends are watching it, but if it contains a gratuitous amount of violence or sex scenes or really anything that lacks goodness or distorts beauty, then we may need to ask ourselves, is this something that I really need to be watching? Is this something that I should be feeding my brain and my soul? I know that this can sound like a lot of don't do this and don't do that, right? And to be honest, that's how I felt the first time that I had heard this talk. But the Mosaic Law is not about control over us, it is about guidance. So don't think of it like a big stop sign in the middle of the road. Think of it like guardrails keeping you from falling over the cliffside. Deacon John was actually talking about a lot of these same themes at Mass last week, and I really like when he said our emotional, our mental, and our social health begins with what we put into our minds. And then he said that thoughts are like seeds that we plant into the ground. We have to make the right choices in what we feed our minds. Now we get to the fun part. How do I tell if something is good, beautiful, and true? How can I see God in a movie that is not religious and does not talk about Jesus or is Christian in any kind of way? It's actually a lot easier than you think. And this is why I'm so glad to be covering this. I'm going to be going over 3 movies that are not religious, movies that you've probably seen or at least heard of, that have the presence of God within them, whether it was the filmmaker's intention or not. All right, number 1, I love a good scary movie. Scary movies are pretty interesting to me because to me, they're like the easiest place to find like a Christian message. But the one I'm going to be focusing on today is one that you've probably seen, even if you're not a big horror movie fan. We are going to be talking about A Quiet Place. A Quiet Place is the 2018 directorial debut from John Krasinski, or Jim from The Office. If you haven't seen it, the premise is pretty simple. The planet has become infested with these monsters, and they're incredibly sensitive to hearing. So if you make any noise at all, you're pretty much dead on the spot. Now, one thing that I love about this film is right away, it pretty much lets you know what's at stake. The film opens with a family led by Krasinski and his real-life wife, Emily Blunt, as they gather supplies in a store, dropping us in on day 89 of this plague. Now, while they're in the store, their youngest child gets his hands on a toy rocket ship. And then they continue their journey back home when... So this movie lets you know right away, we are not messing around. If you are not quiet, you are gonna die. Your kids are gonna die. Do you guys see any dogs in this movie? Because I don't. But anyway, so then the movie skips about like a year, and we kind of see a glimpse into how these people live their lives. Also, I didn't know this until I started doing research for this talk, but the family's last name is Abbott, and in Catholicism, an abbot is the title given to a priest or a monk in charge of a monastery, which a monastery is kind of like a Catholic temple. And sometimes these monasteries take a vow of silence. So I'm not sure if that was just kind of tossed in there to be like a little Easter egg or kind of like a hint towards that, or if it's just a coincidence. But either way, I thought that was pretty cool. But anyway, we see how they've managed to make their lives work while living in silence. They grow and catch their own food, they eat as a family and pray before the meal, and they even play games and continue to grow together as a family unit. Now, it's very common in monster movies for the monster to represent fear or evil. I think it's very interesting that in this movie, the way that they are able to combat this evil and prosper is by keeping the family unit strong. And even more so, we find out that the mother in the family is pregnant. And the first thought that popped in my head was, why? I mean, didn't your son just die like a year ago? Don't babies cry like all the time? Why would you risk having a child in this post-apocalyptic world that you're in? And then it hit me. Because it's worth it. Life is worth the risk. It's worth the struggle. You are worth it. And this family knows that. They've prepared extensively for the birth of this child. They see the evil in this world. They recognize all the fear and all the risk, and they say, you will not control me. Fear will not control me. I am free, and my family will grow and bear fruit.
You're all right. You're all right.
Psalm 56:3 says, "When I am afraid, I put my trust in you. In God, whose word I praise, in God, who I trust, I will not be afraid. What can man do to me?" It is for this reason alone, especially in the context of the world that we live in today, that makes this movie one of the most profoundly Christian films in the history of the world. There's even a scene in this movie that mirrors a passage in the book of Revelation when the woman labors to give birth as the dragon is about to devour the child, but the child is called up to God. And there's something very similar that happens in this movie, except it is the monster that is called away, sparing the mother and the child. And the last connection that I will make, which I am so sorry, but I will be spoiling the ending to all of these films, only because it really drives home the point that I'm trying to make. But if you haven't watched it, I apologize. Towards the end of the movie, there's a point where the monster has the two kids pinned, trapped, there's nowhere for them to go. And in his final act of love for his children, the father looks at his daughter and he signs to her, "I love you. I will always love you." And then he lets out a cry and allows the beast to devour him for the sake of saving his children and kind of beyond that, giving humanity a chance to continue. Whenever we talk about God's love for us, God's unconditional love, how he is willing to leave the 99 behind and go after that one. Whenever we talk about how Jesus suffered and died so that we can live eternally, this is what that looks like through the lens of a father protecting his children in the same way that we are God's children. So yeah, if you haven't seen Quiet Place, I highly recommend it. And if you have seen it, I encourage you to watch it again, kind of with the lens of this new Christian perspective kind of put on top of it. But I love this movie. This is a movie that I'm down to watch pretty much whenever I can just, turn on the TV, grab the popcorn and the candy, kick back, and have a great time. But now let's change gears and go to a completely different vibe, because I also love comedies and I'm very excited to tell you about one of my all-time favorites. We're talking about Juno.
No. There it is. That little pink plus sign is so unholy.
That ain't no Etch-a-Sketch. This is one doodle that can't be undid, Holmes Gillett.
Now, Juno isn't like Quiet Place in the sense of there being like a central Christian theme throughout the entire film. This is very much a secular movie, but it's the perfect example of how God sees beauty in the broken. Juno is a 2007 coming-of-age comedy about a teenage girl who finds out that she's pregnant, and right away her first instinct is, well, I need to get an abortion. However, on her way inside the clinic, she has an interesting encounter.
Well, it's good seeing you, Soo-Chin.
Your baby probably has a beating heart, It can feel pain. And it has fingernails.
Fingernails? Really?
And this next scene that I'm about to play, when I was in college studying film, every single one of my professors played this scene at least once. And they all explained how this is a masterclass in non-verbal storytelling. But I think looking a little deeper, this scene also displays Juno finding truth and goodness in what the girl outside told her, that her baby has fingernails.
God appreciates your miracle.
And I just find it fascinating that with me being in a non-religious school, non-religious teachers, and a few teachers being very vocal about the fact that they were not religious, but there is still something in this scene that resonated with them as being good, despite the message of this scene being very against our culture and society today. This idea of finding beauty in the broken comes up a couple more times in this film. Juno decides to give the baby up for adoption, and she finds a couple that is unable to have children. But Juno recognizes how much love this couple has, and ultimately decides that they are the perfect parents to raise this child. We all find ourselves in situations in life where things do not go according to plan. Juno struggles with being pregnant in high school, knowing that people are judging her every single day. But she's willing to go through that because she knows the good that will come out of giving this baby to a couple that is wanting of this child. And I also have to give a shout out to Juno's parents, who very quickly after finding out that Juno is pregnant, step up to the plate and support her throughout this entire journey. They really don't condemn her at all, and instead they look at this as, well, this is the situation that we're in, what can we do now? I think sometimes we hide from God because we feel like we've made too big of a mistake and that God won't love us anymore, which could not be further from the truth. Because God is always there to help us. He is always there to support us. And more than anything, he just wants us to put our faith and our trust in him. He wants us to rely on him to get through the difficulties of everyday life. All right, here come the spoilers. During the emotional climax of the film, we find out that this perfect couple that Juno has found is getting a divorce. Once again, life did not go as planned, and these people's dreams are crushed. Still, Juno is able to see the beauty in this situation, and she leaves a note for Vanessa that says, "I'm still in if you are." Despite life not going perfectly, Juno still values this child's life, and she knows that there is somebody out there who will love this child wholeheartedly with the same unconditional love that God gives us. Juno is actually in my top 10 films of all time, probably, because I love coming of age stories. And then also just as a comedy, this movie works in every possible way.
Your little girlfriend gave me the stink eye in art class yesterday.
Katrina's not my girlfriend, all right? And I doubt that she gave you the stink eye. That's just the way her face looks, you know? That's just her face.
Yeah.
Plus the music in this movie is just chef's kiss, absolute perfection. So, all right, now stay with me now. The last movie or movies that we're going to talk about is the Lord of the Rings trilogy.
Go back to the shadow. You shall not pass!
We talked about horror. We talked about comedy. Where my nerds at? Here we go. Woo! Now, Lord of the Rings is again different from A Quiet Place and Juno because, plot twist, this actually is 100% a Catholic story. The author of the books, J.R.R. Tolkien, was a devout Catholic and also a soldier in World War I. Seeing the horrors of war had a profound impact on his faith, and he joined a writers group with the likes of C.S. Lewis, the author of the Chronicles of Narnia, where they created stories that were built upon their Christian faith. Stories that would be the perfect allegories of God, the devil, sin, and how to live a life of holiness. He got to work and began creating what ultimately became the story of The Lord of the Rings. Now, I could spend an entire semester breaking down the Catholic symbolism and imagery that is present in Lord of the Rings, and in fact, that is a legitimate college class that you can take on some Christian campuses. But for now, I'll stick to the basics. But honestly, let me know if y'all want to start a St. Luke's movie club, because I am totally down. All right, let's get into it. So, the heart of The Lord of the Rings is about human depravity. What happens if you let sin consume your life? So you have the ring, which is identified as the ring of power. St. Augustine says that power is at the heart of sin. Sin is trying to dominate your soul. So what happens to the one who wears the ring? It empties you out. The Catholic Church doesn't define sin as a thing. Rather, it is a lack of God, like a cavity that's in a tooth. The big bad of Lord of the Rings, Sauron, is a bodiless figure that's almost like a black hole just wanting to swallow up everything. Gollum is a fallen hobbit. He was a man until the ring became his obsession, and through his own sin, he's withered away into near nothingness. And that's Tolkien's point. The lust for sin and power empties you. Now, what's the plot of the film? Someone has to take the ring to the land of evil where it was created and destroy it. And while the world says, "Give me your biggest and your strongest," the hero of this story is a small hobbit named Frodo. Hobbits don't fight, but they are cunning, and they use their enemy's power against them. Okay, well, how does Christ battle evil? Christ doesn't come as a warrior. He doesn't conquer violence with a greater violence. He allows the evil to come to him, and then he explodes it from within with his divine mercy. The Catholic Church describes Christ as priest, prophet, and king. Well, in The Lord of the Rings, there is a character that meets each of those criteria. Frodo would be the priest because he makes a sacrifice. He is willing to sacrifice himself to save everyone. Gandalf is the prophet because he is the teacher. He's the one that guides them on their journey. And then last but not least, Aragorn would be the king. He is literally the return of the king. And all three of these characters are Christ figures because they give themselves away in love. Plus, they all have a death and a resurrection experience at some point during that story. Now, God is never explicitly mentioned in Lord of the Rings, except once. When Gandalf is fighting this great demon creature, he says,
I am a servant of the secret fire.
God is depicted several times in the Bible by fire. When Jesus is with his disciples and he says, I have come to set the world on fire. Now, he obviously doesn't mean a destructive fire, but rather a holy fire. He's talking about the Holy Spirit. When arriving at Mordor, Frodo doesn't come with an army, but rather he's able to slip in and travel into the heart of darkness, where he can destroy the ring of great evil that has been created. And Frodo is actually almost consumed by the evil himself, until another Christ figure comes along. Sam is able to bring him to clarity and help him destroy the ring. When Jesus died on the cross, he died our death. He took away our spiritual death, and in doing so, took away death's power over us. That is Lord of the Rings. And what's truly incredible with particularly the Lord of the Rings, but also really, all of these films that I've talked about, they're all very successful, very well-known movies. I picked 3 movies that are universally praised as these are objectively good movies. For something like The Lord of the Rings, that's one of the most popular and profitable movie franchises of all times, not including the books, the toys, the merchandise, all of the Comic-Cons. It's a little mind-blowing to me that a profoundly and intentionally Catholic story has had such a positive, captivating effect. And I wish we had more media like this. I wish we had more Christian content that could be praised by people if they know what the intention was or if they don't, because it's still bringing goodness, it's still bringing beauty, it's still bringing those truths into their lives, whether they realize it or not. And yeah, I just think that that's beautiful. Okay, so now you might be asking, does everything that we watch or listen to have to have this strong moral message? No, of course not. We can have entertainment just for the sake of having entertainment. Even going back to just the beginning of this talk, I went back to King Kong and was like, okay, what's the deeper Christian meaning here? And there's not one. Big monkey fights dinosaur. That's it. And that's okay, because there is also nothing in King Kong that would turn my heart away from God in any kind of way. And that's why as Catholics, it's important to learn, right? It's important to learn, why do we believe what we believe? What does the church teach about this or this? But also we have to shape our hearts. We have to ask, what are the things that I love? What am I feeding my heart? Because I can watch a movie or listen to a song and say, okay, no, I recognize that that is not truth. But also the more I expose myself to things that are distortions of goodness or distortions of beauty, or the people that I surround myself with, or the things that I love that are not all good and not all beautiful, the more that my heart is given to things, that are not truly good and not truly beautiful. And then the less I'm able to guide my heart. And I think that the scary thing is that we can find ourselves in a place where we train ourselves to love things that are not worth our hearts. So here is my invitation, because we are all walking in this world that has a severe lack of truth. And so we have to stay vigilant, and we have to seek out that which is good, beautiful, and true. And that's a wrap. What's this? A post-credit scene? Who does this guy think he is? Marvel? No. So before I go, I just want to say one more thing. Lent is coming up. This next Wednesday is going to be Ash Wednesday, and I want to challenge you to do something. This is something that my wife told me about, and I thought that this was a great idea. I challenge you to donate one thing per week during Lent. And it doesn't have to be a big thing. You don't have to go give away your PS5, but also try and make it a thing that does have some value to you. I just think that this is a great way to, remind ourselves that God is the priority. He is the number one thing that is in our lives. And we do have a lot of distractions, but we are willing to clear those distractions to grow closer to him. So if you have just a ton of, clothes or shoes, or you're like me and you collect a lot of stuff, I think it would be a good idea to try and clear ourselves a bit this Lent, both physically, mentally, and spiritually. But that's all I got. This is the real end of this video. I'll pass it off to Mateo there in person. All right.